Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 31 of the 2020 podcast series, getting you ready for the NFL Draft, which is set to begin Thursday, April 23rd, the first virtual draft in the league's history. 100% virtual. It's going to feel a lot like your online fantasy football draft. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how the networks broadcast this draft with it being 100% virtual. You know, the teams are going to be communicating. They've got FaceTime, they've got Zoom, they've got Skype. They have all these different resources at their fingertips. You know, it's going to be kind of a more of a futuristic type draft. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes. You know, you're going to be having none of the facilities are open, so everyone will be essentially networked in from home. So it's really going to be an interesting dynamic, something that we've never seen before. And quite frankly, hopefully we don't ever see again. COVID-19 is very real. And I want to take a moment, the last 6 podcasts, this will be the 7th in this free agent tour, if you will. I've really been talking about how I want to continue my podcasts during this time because, frankly, this is kind of a release for me. It's kind of an outlet, take my mind off of things, but also I want it to be something for everybody as well. Really be able to talk about football, take our minds off of things, really have that outlet to be able to discuss something positive and really look forward to the 2020 NFL football season. What that's going to look like, where are we at with social distancing and such, not really sure when is the season going to actually begin. Those are questions that still need to be answered, but I want this to be a positive experience. I want to be able to talk about the draft, talk about teams, talk about team needs, and really how the free agency has impacted teams and their draft boards, and be able to talk about those things. And I want really want to share my thoughts, my input, and hopefully this next hour plus that we're here together will give you that avenue, that outlet, for at least a little bit of time. So we'll go ahead and jump into things. The last few podcasts, it's been a tour by division of sorts, really taking a look at each team in the league and taking a look at, okay, what does it look like? What does the roster look like after free agency? And really, how does that impact the draft? So really, we're going through each of the draft picks, and I've got a 7-round mock draft. And so really taking a look at each team's draft picks from first round all the way through the 7th, and really take a look at how the free agent market might have impacted what they're going to be doing in the draft. Obviously, there are some big free agent acquisitions. Obviously, Tom Brady being the first and foremost there with the Bucs. But there are other impactful free agent acquisitions, and at the same time, if one team is gaining a star, then another team obviously is going to be losing one. So what does that do for the team, and how does that impact their focus in the draft? And that's really part of what I want to take a look at and really jump into things. And then, okay, so you have a hole. What are you going to do with that draft pick? Who's going to be the best fit for that? And that's one of the things that, I think is so fun about analyzing the draft. I've been putting mock drafts together for 20 years, ever since my final year at USC, working for the Annenberg School of Communications, the TV station, Annenberg TV News, given a story projecting where USC's draft eligible prospects would go in the draft. Enjoyed that so much, did a mock first round, and really the rest has been history. And, I watch over 200 games a year with the college football season. And then, after that, I've got all of my notes that I've compiled, and, I feel like I have a pretty good feel on, each of the players, where I feel that their strengths and weaknesses are, and where they should be going in the draft. And also, where would they logically go in terms of what team and also their draft stock, in what round, because it's not just a matter of looking at your board going, okay, well, this is the number 5 tackle and the first 4 are off the board, so this team's absolutely going to take that number 5 tackle. It's not necessarily going to be the case. Who's going to be the best fit for that organization? That's really what a lot of what the front offices are really determining, getting with their scouts, getting with their coaching staff, getting with the GM and such, and really sitting down and taking a look at what does a player, what are we looking for when we're talking about the Arizona Cardinals? We're going to jump right into the NFC West. That's really what we're talking about here. We've got the NFC West. Next podcast is going to be the AFC West, and then we'll be done with this tour. And then after that, we'll be taking a look at each of the positions, kind of do a positional breakdown, on where I see players going in the draft, and in terms of my grades, where I see guys going and what each position, what to expect, in terms of the draft itself. And then my final mock draft, I'll break that down in the last podcast just before the draft. So you look at the Arizona Cardinals, and if you're Steve Keim, if you're Cliff Kingsbury, you're obviously going to be looking at a number of things. And I think one of those obviously was going to be a wide receiver. Larry Fitzgerald, the ageless wonder, back again for another year, but that his time is coming to an end. And his career, his Hall of Fame, first ballot Hall of Fame career is coming to a close. So inevitably, everyone was looking at that number 8 overall pick as that's going to be a receiver. Absolutely. Why not reunite CeeDee Lamb with his college quarterback in Kyler Murray? Makes perfect sense, right? But, I looked at this and I said, they drafted 3 wide receivers in last year's draft. Andy Isabella, Hakeem Butler, who was injured and now he's back. Keyshawn Johnson. No, not ESPN's Keyshawn Johnson, but Keyshawn spelled Keesean. To go along with Christian Kirk. Larry Fitz coming back. CeeDee Lamb, sure, it made sense, but at the end of the day, DeAndre Hopkins kind of fell into their lap. Houston reported, according to ESPN, that DeAndre Hopkins was looking for a raise, and ultimately it didn't fit within their budget, and ultimately they traded their running back, traded David Johnson, especially with the emergence of Kenyon Drake. They signed Kenyon Drake and ultimately let David Johnson go, and there's DeAndre Hopkins in as the really the guy that's going to take over for Larry Fitz there in Arizona. So that kind of tempers the need for a wide receiver. Will they go with another receiver in the draft? It's quite possible, but that's not going to be their first round pick. So then you look at it and you say, okay, well, DJ Humphries is their left tackle. And so are they going to go offensive tackle here? That's going to be the next question. And what's interesting is the first time in quite a while, that DJ Humphries was actually able to complete an entire season and, was the starter there on the left side. He signed a 3-year, $43 million contract. So he signed through 2022. So DJ Humphries will be the left tackle. The question is going to be, okay, well, who's manning the right tackle position? And you have Marcus Gilbert on the roster, the 32-year-old, 9-year vet, signed a 1-year, $1 million contract. He's going to be a free agent at the end of the season. He's not going to be the long-term answer. And you also wonder if he's going to be, can he stay healthy throughout an entire season? And the reason why I still think Arizona is going to look offensive line is just the fact that they haven't been able to protect the quarterback in Arizona. And that's a huge concern. And so when you talk Arizona and you talk production there on the offensive line or really lack thereof, trying to get that pulled up here. So when you look at the numbers, Cardinals have given up 50 or more sacks in 3 straight seasons. So this past season, obviously the third in a row, over 50. They finished in a tie for 5th with Atlanta and Washington with 50 sacks given up on the dot. And the problem with it is you've got a young quarterback in Kyler Murray, and you want to be able to protect your investment. Kyler Murray is a guy that is incredibly athletic and likes to get out on the move, likes to extend plays, likes to manipulate that pocket. And you've got to be able to take some pressure off of him and really allow him to survey the field and make plays down the football field. And so I absolutely believe that they are going to go with an offensive tackle. And the question is going to be which tackle is going to be available. So the reason why I say that is, the Giants are a pivotal team in this draft because do they go Isaiah Simmons or do they go with an offensive tackle like Jedrick Wills? Jedrick Wills could fill in and play that right tackle position right away for the Giants. So that's it. That's inevitably, if Dave Gettleman looks at that and says, I'm protecting Daniel Jones and I need a guy that's going to be able to block for Saquon Barkley, then Jedrick Wills is going to be that guy. In which case, I think Arizona's looking at either Mekhi Becton or Tristan Wirfs. And I'll tell you, I think Tristan Wirfs would be that pick because Tristan Wirfs, has proven to be not only a versatile offensive lineman, but he's a guy who can play that right tackle position and played it at a high level with the Hawkeyes. And Mekhi Becton, more so of a left tackle. Sure, a guy his size can thrive at the right tackle position. Look at Phil Lodeholt, who played in Minnesota for over a decade. So Jedrick Wills, though, if Isaiah Simmons does go to the Giants, and that's what I have projected right now, then I think Jedrick Wills is going to be your guy. And I look at Jedrick Wills, and I think his pass sets were some of the best among the draft-eligible prospects this year. So quick to fire out of his stance, to meet the rusher at the edge, very light on his feet, making the lateral movement look effortless. Dominated some of the best pass rushers in the SEC, including Darrell Taylor, a guy that just, he has all kinds of speed coming off the edge, but he just couldn't find a way to get to that edge versus Wills because of that lateral agility. If you get a chance to look that up on YouTube, absolutely watch some of that footwork. It was really impressive. That flexibility as well, maintaining leverage throughout the play. That pad level doesn't creep up on him. There are a lot of linemen that tend to get that pad level a little bit too high. When that happens, you lose leverage and bad things can happen. You can lose your balance. You can get driven back. You want to be able to maintain a low center of gravity. Wills also very powerful. He can unlock his hips, provide that initial punch that stuns his man. And once he has him square, he really showcases, like I said, that agility. Looks like a basketball player, mirroring the defender, really calm on the secondary moves as well, using some subtle movements. Doesn't really overreact, keeps himself in position. If he is going to get beat in pass protection, it's because he overextends himself. So if he's under control, maintaining a wide base, he can be absolutely dominant. And even if he is beaten, he has the skills to quickly recover. I think Wills also plays with a mean streak in the running game. You see that he's looking to punish guys in his path. Very nasty disposition. Generates a ton of movement on his down blocks. Agile, balanced in space, locating and locking onto his moving targets, looking to finish on the edge. There was a judo throw that he had on Marlon Davidson of Auburn, getting under his pad level, opening up a gaping hole for Najee Harris on a 6-yard touchdown. Now, Wills is just 6'4", unlike Tristan Wirfs, who was 6'5", and Mekhi Becton, who's 6'7". He is just 6'4", so he lacks some of the height of a prototypical NFL offensive tackle, but his arm length is over 34 inches, so it definitely makes up for it. So there is some length there. And I think he's just really scratching the surface on his potential. And, I think still learning to pick up blitzes and really learning to put everything together. But I think he's a significant upgrade at right tackle, even with Marcus Gilbert, a guy who's been an NFL veteran. But I think his health has to be a concern at this point. He's 32 years of age as well. I think he's going to be someone who can really take Jedrick Wills under his wing and ultimately at some point be able to usher in the Jedrick Wills era there at the right tackle position. And you get two young offensive tackles there in DJ Humphries and Jedrick Wills. I think that'd be a nice little combo there because DJ Humphries himself, he's just 26 years of age, 5 years in the league. And again, he's signed through 2022. So you get some continuity there up front on the offensive line. I think things will move pretty well there for Arizona. So after they get their offensive lineman, then I think Arizona, they may be on the market for a running back. Now, I mentioned that Kenyon Drake, was re-signed, and I thought he had a breakout performance. Kenyon Drake now signed through 2021, an $8.4 million contract, and his play ultimately was what led to David Johnson, who after a big season has kind of been for fantasy owners. I know it's been a bit of a letdown. He had just 94 carries for 345 yards and 2 touchdowns this past season. Compare that with Kenyon Drake, just 123 carries, but he went for 643 yards. That's 5.2 yards per carry and 8 touchdowns. So Kenyon Drake absolutely is a guy who has some of that explosive speed on the outside. But I think when you look at the roster and you look at the running backs that are currently on the team, they're lacking that power, a powerful running back. Chase Edmonds is a guy who is a complimentary back, a guy who can catch the football out of the backfield, but he's built a lot like Kenyon Drake. DJ Foster's another guy who could potentially be a wide receiver. He's very athletic and catch the football out of the backfield. I want to see a guy that they can bring in there that could be more of the hammer than anything else. And I'm looking at AJ Dillon out of Boston College. Now you're looking at that pick and you're saying, wow, AJ Dillon, would he really come off the board in let's see, in round number 2? Well, no. Arizona doesn't have a second round pick, but they do have a third round pick. And that's really where I think AJ Dillon is going to go. He's 6 foot, 247 pounds, the junior out of Boston College. A lot of people, they talk about, look, the bigger backs, especially a guy, he caught just 13 passes this past season, just 21 in his career with the Eagles. But, they talk about, well, the bigger running backs, that don't really catch the football. They're kind of a one-trick pony. But I look at AJ Dillon, and I think that, this is a tremendous athlete. He's a big dude, but he shows that he can run over you, but he can also run by you as well. He didn't run the sub 440 that everyone was talking about, but still, when you're 6 foot, 247 pounds, you shouldn't be able to run a 4.5 340 or showcase a 41-inch vertical leap. This guy has the lower body explosion. He has the ability, in that second gear to get to the second level in a hurry. This is a guy also in just 3 seasons there, over 4,300 yards in his career, and really, he had a tremendous freshman year, broke out onto the scene, over 1,500 yards on the ground, 14 touchdowns, battled a high ankle sprain there in 2018, only played in 10 games, still managed over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. And then as a junior, really rebounded, was sharing the backfield a little bit with David Bailey, who I think is built just like AJ Dillon, but nearly 1,700 yards on the ground and 14 touchdowns. I did mention as well the 13 receptions, 15 yard per catch average as well. So to me, I look at AJ Dillon. He's still going to be working on his hands. That's not really what he's known for, but this is a guy I think he'll complement what Kenyon Drake does very well. And then you have Chase Edmonds and DJ Foster, who can really be, those guys that you can really feature in the passing game. But I think that 1-2 punch of Kenyon Drake and AJ Dillon, if there's a team or if there's a guy in this draft, if teams are going to be looking to, because it is a copycat league, looking for a running back that's going to be the next Derrick Henry, I think AJ Dillon could potentially be that guy. Just big, physical guy, but also has tremendous speed. And I think that underrated speed out of this guy, a lot of people talk about he doesn't have much of a burst. I'd argue that, he does have a burst. And, there is one of those things. Is he going to necessarily outrun everybody? Not necessarily, but he's got a really good burst to the hole, and the thing is he's very difficult to bring down in the open field. So I think this is a great pick for Arizona, especially in round number 3. But those are their only 2 picks in the first 2 days. So day 3 starts out, and Arizona, I think they have to look for a tight end at some point, right? To get another target there for Kyler Murray, sitting there at 114 overall. And they're going to be looking at a few guys, possibly Hunter Bryant. Really, Max Williams is on the roster. Darrell Daniels, Dan Arnold. None of these guys really strike fear, in opposing defenses. I'm looking at Thaddeus Moss, the junior out of LSU, 6'2", 250 pounds, the son of Hall of Famer Randy Moss. And the thing with Thaddeus Moss is he's not the best blocker, but I think what you do see out of him is his ability to stretch the field vertically up the seam, a guy who has tremendous hands, the catch radius. You saw some really nifty footwork there in the bowl games along the sideline, some flexibility, his ability to extend for the football out of bounds and keep his toes in bounds. Really looks a lot like his dad out on the football field. After a freshman season there at NC State, transfers to LSU, and 47 catches, 570 yards, and 4 touchdowns for Joe Burrow and company there with the Tigers. Battled an injury and ultimately wasn't able to compete at the Combine. So, I think that's why his draft stock drops a little bit. And I think with Thaddeus Moss sitting there in round number 4, I think it makes a ton of sense for Arizona. They have to find a pass catcher. And look, I've got Thaddeus Moss going 114 to the Cardinals and Hunter Bryant 116 to the Jags. I could see these two guys, their measurables are very similar. I think Hunter Bryant, I think highly of him. Over 800 yards receiving. I worry about the 40 time, ran in the 4.7s. For a guy who's 6'2", that is a bit of a concern. But these guys look like just big, buffed up wide receivers that you can really put, whether it's in the slot or on the outside, create some mismatches. And either one of those guys would make sense for Arizona. Right now I have Thaddeus Moss penciled in there, but I could also see Arizona drafting Hunter Bryant. Either way, they get a tight end. Max Williams, really more of a blocker. When he played at Minnesota, he was really looked at as a guy who can come in to the NFL and be a pass catcher, and we really haven't seen a whole lot of that. So this would be either Moss or Bryant would be a nice addition to the passing game. So I think the second pick that they have in round number 4, yes, they do have 2 fourth-round picks. Arizona will be drafting 131 overall. This was a pick that they got from Houston in the David Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins trade. And, if you're wondering what happened to that second round pick, well, if you guess that it was traded to Houston, number 40 overall, you'd be correct. So some of those draft picks for this year's draft definitely impacted by that draft as well. So Arizona sitting there in round number 4, and I'm looking up front. They've got Zach Allen. They've got Corey Peters there at defensive end, Jonathan Bullard, Michael Dogba, Trevin Coley. I think they need to find another rotational guy, another piece that can come in here who has starter potential. And that's really what I'm kind of looking for Arizona with this pick. A guy who, I think maybe a year or 2 away from actually starting. And because I look at Corey Peters, 10-year veteran, 31 years of age, signed through the 2020 season. He'll be a free agent at the end of the year. Trevin Coley was signed to a 1-year deal from Indianapolis. So he'll be a free agent at the end of the season as well. So there are some question marks there. Zach Allen, the rookie from a season ago, he's going to be prime, hopefully, for a breakout season. You've got Jonathan Bullard, who's going to be a free agent as well. So a lot of uncertainty there at the defensive end position. I'm looking at Jason Strowbridge out of North Carolina, 6'4", 275, a guy who I thought played very well at the Senior Bowl. A guy who I think was overlooked playing there at North Carolina, but a guy ran a 4.89 40 at the Combine, at 6'4" and 275 pounds, 26 reps at 225 in the bench press. also a 31-inch vertical leap. So, a guy who showed off some pretty good athleticism, and really it was the Senior Bowl that I think, people really started talking about Jason Strowbridge as a guy. I think he was really thought about as a mid to late day 3 guy, not a guy who could potentially come off the board in round number 4. And there are some people that are even talking about him possibly coming off the board sooner than that. Strowbridge, it was actually a solid career. I mean, you look at the numbers: 22 tackles for loss, 10 and a half sacks. A guy who played both tackle and I think he really, because of his his measurables, really fits in well as a 5 technique. And his athleticism was on display. His ability to beat guys off the ball in the one-on-one drills. I think this is an athlete, a guy that can come in there and challenge for that starting spot if Corey Peters is gone at the end of the season. And that's an entire, that is a possibility. You have to prepare for potentially life after Corey Peters, much like you're having to prepare for life after Larry Fitzgerald. Now, you bring in a guy like Jason Strowbridge, allow him to continue to develop, get into an NFL weight room as well, possibly put a little bit more size on him, another 10 to 12 pounds, and really allow him to flash some of that athleticism there at the defensive end position. And I think you could really have something there with Jason Strowbridge. So 6th round. So you're saying, well, what happened to Arizona and their 5th round pick? It was actually forfeited. Number 154 overall. Pick was forfeited. So we're actually moving to round number 6. And I'm looking at the safety position. That's one of the things that I look at them. And they have Budda Baker at free safety. Jalen Thompson is the strong safety right now. Deontay Thompson also on the roster. Chris Banjo was brought in as well. But I just still think there's some uncertainty on the back end of this defense. And I think they need to look at potentially bringing in another strong safety to compete with that group. And I'm looking at Miles Dorn out of UNC. Now Miles Dorn, the thing for him, he wasn't invited to the combine. So that was one of the things we weren't really able to see, what he could do in terms of some of the athleticism and some of the drills. But this is a very intelligent player there at the safety position, a guy that I've enjoyed watching play over the last 4 years for the Tar Heels. And Arizona sitting there at 203, got the pick from New England. Dorn is 6'1", 205 pounds. So he has good size. He's a big hitter. Like Dominique Ross on the roster on there for UNC as well. A guy that can play in the box. He can play over the top a little bit. He's going to be physical, a big hitter. And those were 2 guys I thought I really enjoyed watching play. Were Dorn and Dominique Ross. And Ross, I don't know that Ross is going to get drafted, but I definitely think that Dominique Ross is going to get into an NFL training camp and would have a great chance at making a roster. Now with Dorn, 6 interceptions in his career, 13 pass breakups, had 83 tackles this past season as well. So very active, physical player, excellent size, as I mentioned. So I think that would be a guy, look, 6th round, really good value there. Be able to get in a guy in there that can compete potentially for not only a spot on the roster, but compete for a starting spot down the road. And then finally, I think Arizona does have to consider looking at a cornerback. They do have Patrick Peterson. Byron Murphy was brought in as well through the draft. You're looking at Robert Alford, Jalen Davis there at the cornerback position as well. So, I mean, you've got Peterson, you got Murphy, you got Alford. Who's really going to be the next guy that's going to step up there in the secondary? And, I had to look at a few different players here. Is 7th round too late to look for a corner? It's entirely possible. They could potentially try to trade back up into potentially the 2nd round and look for a guy like Cam Dantzler there in round number 2. But I'm looking at a guy at a UCF, Neville Clark. I think he's got pretty good size. He's 6'1", 190 pounds. So he's got tremendous length. And, look, Central Florida has really been putting a lot of players into the league. And so I feel pretty comfortable with Neville Clark coming off the board in round number 7, a guy who has 29 pass breakups, including 24 in the last 2 seasons, 5 interceptions. So he has tremendous ball skills. And I think that's one of the things that really jumps off the film when you watch him play. The instincts are absolutely there, uses his length to his advantage. And so I think for me, I look at him 7th round. Again, they may go corner before then, but I think this would be really good value at this point to get a guy like Neville Clark, a guy with those type of ball skills. Robert Alford, he's 31 years of age. He signed through 2021, signed a 3-year, $22 million deal. But Patrick Peterson, he's going to be a free agent after this season. So there are some questions there. Absolutely at the position. And if they don't feel confident that Patrick Peterson is going to be back, you may see Arizona use an earlier pick on that cornerback position. And look, there's no guarantee that Jeffrey Okudah is going to go number 3 overall to Detroit. If he's sitting there at number 8, if they feel confident that Marcus Gilbert, I'm going to throw this curveball here. If they think that Marcus Gilbert is going to be the guy, to man that right tackle position in 2020, then I think they could bypass a tackle, bypass the receiver because they've got DeAndre Hopkins, and go corner and go with Jeffrey Okudah if he's still on the board. Or CJ Henderson, I've got him penciled in at number 11. He could fall to number 13 to the 49ers, but there's also a chance that CJ Henderson, because there is a little bit of a drop-off after the top 2 corners, that Arizona could go with CJ Henderson at number 8. And then, then you'd have Patrick Peterson and Henderson with Byron Murphy playing in the slot. And then if Patrick Peterson moves on at the end of the season, then you've got you still have a lockdown corner there on the outside. And so, especially in a division with Jared Goff and Russell Wilson and Jimmy Garoppolo, you're going to need to have secondary players. So just thinking about that, that's always a possibility. And the big question is whether or not Arizona really feels that Marcus Gilbert is the answer. If they feel confident that he's going to be the guy for them, at least in 2020, then get your corner, and then you can focus on getting a tackle later on. But look, my thing is you don't want to be the team that's going to give up 50 sacks for the 4th straight year and have everyone questioning you, going, well, why didn't you take a tackle? When you had the chance, because you don't want to wait in this draft to take a tackle. You can get good value on a corner later on in the draft, but at the tackle position, there are 4 outstanding tackles, and then I think there's a drop off, and then there are considerable drop offs after that. If you get the chance to get Jedrick Wills, Tristan Wirfs, Mekhi Becton, or Andrew Thomas, you absolutely take it. And so that's really what I think with Arizona. If Arizona, look, they could end up going CJ Henderson and then trade back up to get one of those tackles. I think they probably have to give up, there's not a whole lot of draft capital in this year's draft. So they may be looking at 2021 draft stock if they wanted to get both a corner and a tackle in this year's draft. So a lot to really think about there. I think at the end of the day, Jedrick Wills is still going to be that pick for Arizona. So moving on from there, who has the next highest draft selection? Well, it would have been Seattle, except for the fact that San Francisco traded DeForest Buckner, traded the leader of that ferocious front 4, that formidable front 4 of Bosa, Buckner, Armstead, and Ford. So they trade him away. They get the number 13 overall pick, and I think with San Francisco, they're targeting one of 2 players. Honestly, I think with this. And I think it's really depends on what the Jets do at number 11. You look at the receiver position, and they've got Deebo Samuel, absolutely a home run pick there in the 2nd round a season ago. But then you have Kendrick Bourne, Marquise Goodwin, Dante Pettis, Richie James, a lot of the same receiver to be perfectly honest. There's Jalen Hurd, who's a bigger wideout, but they really are lacking that number one wide receiver. And you'll say, well, Deebo Samuel, isn't he a number one? I feel like Deebo Samuel's more of a complimentary receiver. I think they need to get a guy in there that's going to be a true number one wideout and be that target for Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that Jerry Jeudy makes a lot of sense there for San Francisco. I honestly believe that CeeDee Lamb is going to the Raiders there at number 12. So the Jets, really the biggest question mark, because you have Robbie Anderson leaving, there's a huge hole there, and they need a number one wideout there for Sam Darnold. The thing is, though, is they also brought in Brashad Perriman. And so the question is the addition of Perriman to the group with Jamison Crowder and Quincy Enunwa, is this going to be enough for the Jets to look at a different position because, and look at the cornerback position because you have Tremaine Robinson Tremaine Johnson is gone. So Tremaine Johnson's gone. Derek Roberts was let go as well. So you really need a lockdown corner. You brought in Pierre Desir, who really had a emerging career there in Indianapolis. And so you bring him in, he's going to start on one side, but you still need that lockdown corner. And so is it Jerry Jeudy? If they do go Jerry Jeudy, then I think this pick is going to be CJ Henderson, the corner out of Florida. And we talked about him potentially even going to Arizona. But I'm looking at the Jets, and I think the Jets go CJ Henderson, which would then mean this pick would be Jerry Jeudy. But why would this pick potentially be CJ Henderson? Well, you've got Richard Sherman, who's getting, he's getting up there, getting a little long in the tooth. You've got Ahkello Witherspoon battling some injuries. You've got Emmanuel Mosley, who played well in the playoffs. But they need some help there at the cornerback position. They need to get some depth at the position. And look, Richard Sherman at 32 years of age, going to be a free agent at the end of the season. Ahkello Witherspoon also going to be a free agent at the end of the season. If they get a corner at number 13, then that really helps kind of take care of things and solidify things at the position. With CJ Henderson off the board, then I think they have to go receiver at this point. I think that really makes a ton of sense to me. And, with the Niners and Jerry Jeudy, what you're getting there is a receiver who absolutely can run. He's a tremendous route runner. I think that's one of the things that you absolutely see. Jeudy was more of the volume catcher for the Tide, which really allowed Henry Ruggs III to be the big play threat down the field, and Devontae Smith step up as well as a big playmaker as well. Jeudy was the one that burst onto the national scene as a sophomore for Tua as a big play threat. 68 catches, over 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns, won the Biletnikoff Award. And then really as a junior, he allowed Ruggs and Devontae Smith to shine and, kind of took a back seat, if you will. And I think that may have hurt his draft stock a little bit because everyone was talking about him as a potential top 5 pick. And now we're talking about him somewhere in the 10 to 15 range as a result. Jeudy, though, man, you watch me so sudden off the line. I mean, he separates so quickly from the defenders. He can get rerouted by some of the bigger physical corners, but he has that straight line speed to really run by the press corners, eats up the cushion of the corner playing an off coverage in a hurry. Acceleration is so explosive, allows him to run away from defenders after the catch, but really it is that route running, as I mentioned. And really with that, you look at him, that's what makes him an elite prospect. He understands leverage, does a really good job stemming defenders away before making his break, creating that separation in the process. Very fluid hips, allows him to transition effortlessly without any wasted movement. He offers really sharp, precise cuts, and his speed through those cuts put a lot of pressure on the DB as well. You can't allow a free release for Jeudy, so defenders must get physical with him off the ball. Try to get him to reroute. And the other thing, too, is he struggles at times with tracking the football, doesn't always make the necessary adjustments when the ball's in the air, and can have issues with some contested catches. And I think the biggest thing, though, are some of the easy drops in the open field. He just has to eliminate those. But I think he is a wide receiver 1 at the next level, can play inside and outside. Really a guy that can stretch the the field vertically. And, for the 49ers, they add him to a receiving core with Deebo Samuel. I think that's not a nice pair. I just, it's one of those things. You look at the team, George Kittle, second straight 1,000-yard season. Deebo Samuel was the only wide receiver with at least 40 receptions and 800 yards. Emmanuel Sanders was the third leading receiver. He's not on the roster anymore. He's in New Orleans now. So they can't just roll with Kendrick Bourne, Dante Pettis, and Richie James opposite Samuel. I think Jerry Jeudy's going to be this guy unless CJ Henderson is on the board. Then I think they go corner. And so what ends up happening is the 49ers also have pick number 31 overall because, hey, they were the NFC champions and got to play in the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. So they have that 31st overall pick. And I think if it does go corner at number 13, and then I think they're sitting there at number 31, I'm looking at Michael Pittman Jr. out of USC, over 1,200 yards through the air, led the Pac-12 in receiving, and 101 receptions. But look, I think you put on that Utah tape, you see how he dominated those corners, ate up. You couldn't get physical with him off the line, couldn't reroute him. A guy who can make plays down the field, the 50-50 balls, adjust to the football in the air, late separation with, kind of extending that arm out, and then leaping away from the defensive back, creating that separation, allowing him to go up and make a play on the football, and then just so physical after the catch. When you have a receiver who, frankly, teams had to game plan around and really built their game plan around taking away Michael Pittman Jr., when you have Tyler Vaughns, when you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and you have Drake London all on the roster as well, they were more worried about Michael Pittman Jr. than anybody else. That to me, says, this guy is a stud. And I think his physicality, his ability to go up and get the football, I think he could be an absolute stud. And I think he complements Deebo Samuel very well. So I think if CJ Henderson is the pick there for the Niners at number 13, then I think this pick is going to be Michael Pittman Jr. It just feels right. But if Jerry Jeudy, and the way that I have it shaped up right now, if Jerry Jeudy is going to be the pick at number 13, then I think what the Niners are doing, I don't think that taking a corner at 31 overall makes any sense, because I think you're really stretching at that point. I think you have four corners who are going to be first round picks in Okudah and Henderson, Trevon Diggs out of Alabama, and then Christian Fulton of LSU. Any of the other corners, I think you'd just be reaching. So what I'm actually looking at is the interior of that offensive line. Now hear me out with this. Weston Richburg, the center, is coming off a torn patellar tendon injury, and his backup Ben Garland was re-signed. He's now 32 years of age, though, only under contract for one more year. Even if Richburg can start, the right guard position is also going to need attention because Mike Person was released and Tom Compton was brought in on a one-year deal as well to battle Daniel Brunskill for the starting spot. I look at Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan, 6'3", 307, a player of his versatility with experience at both center and guard makes a lot of sense. I mean, Ruiz, as a freshman, played in 10 games, starting at 5 games at right guard for the Wolverines, slid over to the pivot where he started the next 26 games for the Wolverines. Very technically sound athlete. Always working to the whistle. Always seems like he's looking to make a block. Head always on a swivel. He bends well at the knees. You see the flexibility in his hips. Fires off the ball, low pad level, and when he maintains leverage, very effective on his seal blocks, getting those hips around in a hurry to open up a hole for the back. And if you watch him play, as I said, the head on a swivel, but it's the agility. It makes him a perfect candidate to be a lead blocker, gets to the second level in a hurry, always very much under control to make contact and lock onto the moving target. Whenever Ruiz gets his hand on the defender, he's looking to finish the blocks in the most devastating way possible. And in pass protection, fires out of a stance in a hurry after the snap. In pass protection, shoots his hands under the interior lineman's pad level, does a great job with that initial punch at the point, maintains active feet. Those feet are always working, has lateral agility to mirror defenders effortlessly on the inside as well. If he can get his hands on the defender early, he can sustain those blocks to the whistle. But the issue is he doesn't always win with his hands at the point. Susceptible to that quick pass rush moves off the ball. Will get overextended at a time, get a little too far over his feet, lose leverage, and that'll cause him to get driven back. But he's definitely the best interior lineman in this year's draft, and I think he can start immediately for the Niners, whether it's at guard or center. There's a need at both positions there for the 49ers. And so look, if they go receiver at number 13, I think you're looking at Cesar Ruiz here at number 31 overall. So a lot of moving pieces. You can see, the Giants and their selection could potentially influence what the Arizona Cardinals do at number 8. And then the Jets at number 11, whatever they do is going to influence the 49ers sitting there at number 13 and then again at number 31. So, I think you have to have those backup plans. You have to have your board and stay true to your board when you're looking at this and really understanding what you're dealing with. Now, San Francisco, here's the deal. They may end up reaching, for a corner earlier in that draft. And you'll say, well, why would they do that? You just said that there isn't a cornerback that's necessarily worthy of that selection. Well, San Francisco, if you look at them in the third round, they traded the pick to Denver. And then on day three, they don't have a pick in the fourth round. Why? Well, that pick went to Jacksonville, number 137 overall. So they don't actually pick again until the fifth round. And San Francisco, they're not going to stay quiet. I think they're probably going to try to work back into, either the second or third round and look for a corner. I'm looking at if they look second round, I could see them trying to trade back into the second round to get Jalen Johnson out of Utah. I think that'd be a nice selection. AJ Terrell, potentially, another guy who has size. I'm looking at Michael Ojemudia out of Iowa. If you got to watch him at the Senior Bowl, the way that he was able to reroute a bigger physical wideout like Chase Claypool, who's 6'4", 238 pounds, I thought that was impressive. So you're looking at these guys, and I think any one of them could have a home in San Francisco. My mock draft is not going to try to predict any trades. So I'm just going based on the draft board as it's presented to itself. But I think the 49ers, if they don't go with a corner in round number 1, they're going to trade it back into day 2 and land one of those corners, potentially even Bryce Hall. Bryce Hall, look, he was a year removed from having just a tremendous season with 21 pass breakups, then has the gruesome leg injury after 6 games. And, he's kind of the forgotten guy. You could potentially, if his draft stock slides, you might be able to get him at a decent bargain. But I mentioned that the Niners are as it stands, have a couple of 5th round picks. And sitting at 157, one of two spots here. And, I looked at potentially, Isang Bassi out of Wake Forest, but he's just 5'9". He's more of a slot guy. Lavert Hill, Grayson Arnold, more guys that are going to be playing in the slot. So I don't really think that San Francisco is actually going to look for a corner at 157. Sounds kind of weird, I know, because that's really their next need, but I'm actually looking at a tight end. And one of the things with that tight end position, you have George Kittle on the roster. And look, George Kittle, is an all-pro tight end and really been having the last 2 years have been tremendous, just really breakout seasons for him. But behind him, you got Ross Dwelley, Daniel Helm, not much really to speak of in terms of that tight end position. And if you remember a season ago, Foster Moreau out of LSU, more of a, known as a blocker there at LSU, really wasn't featured as a pass catcher, but the athleticism was on display at the combine. And he actually had a pretty good year there for the Raiders. And look, George Kittle was not used as a big time pass catcher there for Iowa, if you'll remember. Ran a 4.540 at the combine and really just blew everybody's socks off. Everyone watched George Kittle through all the drills, and that 5th round pick, obviously now an all-pro tight end, one of the best picks that the 49ers have made in the last few seasons. But I'm looking for another guy that could be a potential, Foster Moreau, a tight end that can come in and really surprise. And I'm looking at Dalton Keene out of Virginia Tech, 6'4", 245 pounds, ran a 4.7 140 at the combine, so really better athleticism than you would expect. His 3-cone drill ran a 7.07. And so, in terms of the context there, that's second fastest among the tight ends to Adam Troutman. A lot of people think that Troutman's going to end up being a second round pick. I have him going in the third round to New England. I thought that he just looked a little stiff, and straining through some of those drills. And he ran a 4.8 40 as well. But definitely, has some lower body explosiveness and some good agility. So there is a chance he can end up being a second rounder. But when you also look at it as well, the short shuttle ran a 4.19 short shuttle, which was fastest among all the tight ends. So it's not a real deep crop of tight ends, but if you're looking for one of those sleepers, I think Dalton Keene can absolutely be that guy. I had him penciled in as more of kind of your H-back type of guy, a guy who's going to be a blocker, but he has sneaky good athleticism and sneaky good hands. Foster Moreau was that for the Raiders, and actually looked like, hey, the Raiders have something here. And I think of George Kittle, and I'm not saying that Dalton Keene's going to be the next George Kittle by any means either, but I think about some of these tight ends, guys that were used primarily as blockers, not really featured in the passing game, and they turn out to be really good athletes. And so that's why I'm looking at Dalton Keene saying, you know what? I could see Kyle Shanahan looking to try to see if he can capture lightning in a bottle a second time at that tight end position. So I think that'd be a pick for Dalton Keene. And look, you could probably still get Dalton Keene with their second pick in round number 5, all the way down at number 177 overall. But I'm actually looking at a kid out of Tulsa. He's 6'1", 205, Reggie Robinson II. And I look at Robinson II because I believe that, he has some of those ball skills, a guy that nobody's really talking about, but a guy who has tremendous size. And I think that's one of the things. I'm sorry, not Reggie Robinson, Reggie Roberson. No, I'm sorry. No, why can't I bring him up? The ball skills are what's really evident here more than anything else. And I'm having issues with my computer here. But Reggie ran a 4.44 40 at the combine, bench press 225, 22 times, 36-inch vertical leap, a 7.09 3-cone drill as well. So among the fastest there in that group. So the athleticism is absolutely there for Reggie. And if I can pull up his stats, his stat line, that's really what I'm trying to get at. And my computer is not allowing me to pull him up. There he is. There we go. It's because they have him down as Reginald Robinson. But in any event, we take a look at the numbers, and a kid, there out of Tulsa, and 34 pass breakups in his career, including 13 this past season, 3 interceptions on the year as well. A guy who has the ball skills, he has good length, can be physical with corners or with receivers, can jam them at the line of scrimmage. I look at Reggie Robinson, and he just feels like a guy that belongs there in San Francisco. And so even if the Niners go with a corner early on, I think this could still be a guy in round 5 that could end up wearing that 49er uniform when it's all said and done. Looking at San Francisco after that, looking at the 6th round, and really, in round number 6, I'm looking at this team, and you've got Quan Alexander, you have Fred Warner, and you have Dre Greenlaw there at the linebacker position, and they're really holding down that group. Tremendous group of young linebackers. They've done a really good job with their draft, bringing in these players. Fred Warner signed through the 2021 season, really emerged as one of the leaders of the defense. Dre Greenlaw really filled in for Quan Alexander this past season, and tremendous athlete. He was a rookie this past season. And then Quan Alexander, he's back. He's only 25 years of age. He's signed through 2022 as well. I'm looking at the depth behind him. There really isn't a whole lot there. And the linebacker that I'm thinking of could also fill in at the safety position. He's done that in his career with the Michigan Wolverines. You've got Jaquiski Tart, you've got Jimmy Ward, who was brought back. Tarvarius Moore also in there at the safety position, got a little bit of playing time in the playoffs and showed out pretty well. But I'm looking at Khaleke Hudson out of Michigan. I think 6th round is probably in the area that he's going to come off the board. Kind of an undersized outside linebacker, but a guy who flies around to the football. That's one of the things that I can absolutely say. He's a guy, if you want to know where the football is going to be, just watch him fly around to it. 5'11", 224 pounds, ran a 4.56 40. At the combine, put up 225 30 times. So when you talk about the power, he absolutely has that. 33-inch vertical leap as well. Not overly explosive. And you worry about a linebacker at 5'11", 224. Is he going to be too tightly wound? Is making him too stiff to move in coverage? But I think he's a guy who absolutely has that range. And like I said, started off his career in Michigan as a safety, and look, as a sophomore, 77 tackles, with 16 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, 2 interceptions, and 9 pass breakups. I mean, just really a phenomenal season. Transitioned to the linebacker position in 2018, and really was kind of a learning experience for him. But what I thought was so impressive is makes that transition. Year 2 at that linebacker position, 101 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, had a sack and a half on the year, 3 pass breakups as well. So didn't really duplicate things in terms of the production there, but he was asked to do a lot of different things. And he was a guy that was playing more sideline to sideline, scraping over the top against run plays. A guy that he had Cameron McGrone. Playing inside. You had Josh Uche rushing the quarterback off the edge. Aiden Hutchinson, the defensive end, I think is going to be a stud as well. But number 7 was just one of those. He was just that calming presence out there on the field. You always knew what you were going to get with Khaleke Hudson. You were going to see that effort coming from him, play in and play out. And he's just a guy that, to me, the thing that is so beautiful about the 49ers with the way that they draft their linebackers. I look at Dre Greenlaw, and a guy that wasn't really overly hyped coming out of Arkansas last year, and he got his chance and stepped up in a big way. And I think that Khaleke Hudson has a chance to do the same. So San Francisco, they have 2 picks in round number 7, and I'm looking at the defensive tackle position for 1. And the reason being, I mean, it's really obvious when you lose a guy like DeForest Buckner, you need to find the tackle position. Solomon Thomas, Eric Armstead, probably going to be in there at defensive tackle, but they need depth behind him. You're looking at DJ Jones, Kevin Givens, Willie Henry, Julian Taylor. So those are some of the names behind Thomas and Armstead. There's a chance that Armstead can end up playing end, but if you want to move him outside to the end position, really he and D Ford can kind of trade off a little bit, because I think D Ford can be a situational pass rush guy and isn't going to necessarily be an every down type of performer. You're going to have to find another defensive tackle. And this could be another area where they end up looking to try to trade back into the draft to get their D tackle. But if they stay where they're at, I'm looking at Khalil Davis out of Nebraska. I think the 49ers want to find guys who can be explosive up front. And Khalil Davis, look, he ran a 4.75 40, measuring in at 6'1", 308 at the combine. Also bench pressed 225 32 times. So a bit of a workout warrior. Nebraska struggled to defend the run, and so you have him and his brother Carlos and Darian Daniels, all of whom were there at the draft, all actually ran really well. Davis ran a 4.82. Daniels at 6'3", 311 ran a 5.18. So a lot of really athletic guys there up front, and they still couldn't stop anyone. So that's one of the things that has to be cause for concern. But I'm looking at Khalil Davis. I look at that athleticism. That's the fastest time, I believe, by a defensive tackle, and especially a guy with with his size over 300 pounds. But he has some ability to be an interior pass rusher, and I think that's one of the things that teams have to covet. He's not much of a guy there against the run, but I don't think he has to be. I think he can be a rotational player, especially if you're getting him in the later rounds like you are. Had 11 tackles for loss and 8 sacks in 2019 as a senior with the Cornhuskers. I think that 8 sacks, he ramped it up from 2 as a sophomore, 3 as a junior to 8 sacks, showing that he can really, when he was an every down guy there in Nebraska, in Lincoln, he was able to produce, able to shoot gaps, able to make plays on the quarterback. And so I think that interior pass rush ability is something that the Niners could use there at defensive tackle. And then I'm looking at safety, and I mentioned, what you had there with Khaleke Hudson. And I think the versatility between the linebacker and safety, can play multiple positions. But I think they still go with another safety as well. Just because, Jaquiski Tart was battling injury. Jimmy Ward, there was question about whether or not he would be brought back. I'm looking at Josh Metellus out of Michigan, a guy who I think can play both safety positions. 14 pass breakups, 5 interceptions in his career, 186 tackles for the Wolverines. Just really a steady performer for them. Not really a spectacular guy, but a guy who did his job. I think if he were to make the team there, in San Francisco, he'd be primarily a special teams performer, at least early on. 5'11", 209, ran a 4.55 40 at the combine, 36.5-inch vertical leap as well. Pretty decent athlete. And I think, like I said, not the most spectacular performer, just a steady performer, a guy who's going to do his job and do it well. It feels like a guy that you can draft late and really be that special teams performer on your roster. I think that's ultimately why Metellus, whether it's with the 49ers or another team, I think he ends up making a roster because he can make plays on special teams. So that'll take care of the 49ers. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at Seattle, the Seahawks, and really what are the Seahawks going to be doing here with their picks. And I think a lot really rides on whether or not Jadeveon Clowney gets drafted. I think that's really the big question mark that is kind of weighing on everybody's mind is what is Jadeveon Clowney going to do? And I think, the longer that he stays a free agent, I think the more inclined everyone is to believe that Clowney's going to end up back in Seattle. I think his price tag was over $20 million. It's dropped to $17 to $18 million according to ESPN. And if it continues to drop, I think at some point Seattle ends up pulling the trigger and they end up bringing him in. If not, I'm looking at Yetur Gross-Matos. His name is penciled all over Seattle here. And the reason why is they need pass rush help. They did bring in Bruce Irvin. But after that, you've got LJ Collier, really was kind of non-existent. That was their first round pick from a season ago. Rasheem Green up front. And, he was drafted out of USC a couple of years ago. A guy that, is not the most explosive pass rusher. He's more of a guy that's going to beat you with technique and power than anything else. You need to get some speed off the edge. And even bringing in, you brought in Clowney. He had just 3.5 sacks. Ezekiel Ziggy signed to a 1-year deal, just managed 2.5 sacks. He's not coming back. So even though you draft LJ Collier, you still need a pass rusher. Especially considering you had just 28 sacks in 2019. That's just not going to cut it. The 26th ranked defense, was really what let the Hawks down. If you're talking about Seattle, 11-5 record, even though Seattle couldn't catch San Francisco atop the NFC West, still got to the playoff berth for the 8th time in the last 10 seasons. And Russell Wilson, look, he did his thing on the offensive side of the ball. But that 26th ranked defense really is cause for concern. I think if they don't go LJ Collier, you could potentially, they don't go defensive end and go Yetur Gross-Matos. They did re-sign Jaron Reed. You have Poona Ford there at the nose, but they could potentially go with a guy like Ross Blacklock, a twitched up defensive tackle. I think that makes some sense there for them as an interior pass rusher. But, and looking also, look, that defense, it was kind of painfully obvious, that the Legion of Boom is gone. No longer will they be patrolling the back end of that defense. Seattle's pass defense, 27th against the pass. Shaquille Griffin locked in as one corner, but you look at Trey Flowers, a converted safety. He might have the size and length that Pete Carroll and John Schneider look for, but he's more of a complementary piece. He was a converted safety. And that's one of the things I think he's still learning the position. Kind of reminds me a lot of what Quentin Dunbar was doing there. He converted from a receiver to the cornerback position, and he's a guy that they traded for. And I think bringing Dunbar in, it may not keep them from drafting a guy like Trevin Diggs if he falls, but I think it'll temper it enough to where they can look elsewhere. So what if I told you that the health of Russell Wilson should actually outweigh all of these defensive needs? Now, Seattle gave up 48 sacks and allowed 111 quarterback hits, which was the fourth highest in the league in 2019. And to make matters worse, you lose George Fant in free agency, your right tackle, which really leaves the newly acquired duo of Cedric Ogbuehi and Brandon Shell to replace him. Do you feel confident? How about left tackle Dwayne Brown is going to be 35 years of age at the start of the season, is only under contract through 2021. Do you feel confident now? I think what's going to end up happening is Seattle's going to address this position early in the draft, and I'm looking at Ezra Cleveland out of Boise State. Ascending prospect, and I think it's really thanks in large part to his athleticism. Cleveland came to Boise State as an all-state defensive lineman. Also was a high school wrestler, so he has that background. After he redshirted in 2016, went on to start 40 games for the Broncos. Two-time first-team All-Mountain West selection as well. And it doesn't take long when you put the film on just to see how light on his feet he is. He's really quick out of his stance to get into his pass sets, and plays with not only excellent knee bend, but also remains upright. I think that's one of the things that you see. You don't see him leaning at the waist or anything like that. He plays upright, and that ability allows him to move laterally and really stay light on his feet, stays on the balls of his feet, and really just moves with tremendous balance. He's very quick laterally, like I said, in his kick slide with short, choppy steps. Looks like a typewriter out there with a boom, 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 boom. Getting to the edge, beating the edge rusher to the edge. His initial strike with his hands is quicker, with excellent hand placement under the rusher's pad level. Does a really good job keeping his hands active, really active hands, keeping that defender in front, working to drive his man up the field and away from the pocket. Awareness is also apparent, often making some subtle movements to his right or left to pick up the blitzing linebacker or defensive back. But he's a finesse guy. He lacks the power in his lower body to anchor or generate any movement, which is really surprising given that he was able to rep out 225 31 times at the combine. So he's got the upper body strength, but really, we need to make sure that he doesn't skip leg day. So he needs to get into an NFL weight room and really solidify that lower body strength. That lack of power is keeping him from being that elite tackle at this point. His pad level does seem to get too high at times in the run game, which will also take away his effectiveness in generating movement. Again, proof that he's much more confident and comfortable in pass protection, but the movement skills can be used in the running game, especially climbing to the second level. Fluid movement allows him to pick up defenders, pick them off in the open field, has the quick hips to seal off his man to allow the running back to cut off of his block as well. So look, he's far from a finished product. He came out as a junior, could have come back as a senior and really hit the weight room, and could have been an early pick in the 2021 draft. Obviously, Penei Sewell is the number one offensive tackle. You have Alex Leatherwood as well, but he could have been one of those guys right in that conversation. But he's still one of the more athletically gifted offensive tackles in this draft. And I think he could potentially man the right tackle position in 2020 and then take over for Dwayne Brown. That he's starting to get a little long in the tooth. You look at that 35 years of age, a little bit of a concern, could potentially end up being a cap casualty as well at the end of the season. So I think adding Ezra Cleveland does make a lot of sense. A lot of people have Josh Jones out of Houston going here. I actually think that Josh Jones will be a better fit in Tennessee at the right tackle position. I feel like Ezra Cleveland can go in there in Seattle and really usher in a new beginning there at the left tackle position. I think Dwayne Brown, his days will ultimately be numbered there in Seattle on the left side. But like I said, Ezra Cleveland could potentially be a right tackle to start and then shift over to left tackle whenever Seattle does decide to move on from Dwayne Brown. So Seattle, round number 2. They have 2 picks in round 2, and I think they look to shore up what I was talking about there up front. So I think that first pick, I'm looking at Julian Okwara out of Notre Dame, 6'4", 252 pounds. He battled some injuries, which was why, I think it was a tibia fracture that ultimately kept him out of the remainder of the season for the Irish, and also was not able to compete at the combine. But Okwara, look, he's more of the speed rusher to his brother Romeo, who was more of the could potentially be a 5 technique and more of a power guy. Okwara, look, he's known for getting off the edge. 24 tackles for loss, 15.5 sacks, and 4 forced fumbles in his career. I like him because of his length, his athleticism, his ability to get to the quarterback. He doesn't always get home. And so when you look at those numbers, you're like, wow, he only, this past season in 9 games had 5 sacks, but that also doesn't count, the number of times that he was able to pressure the quarterback, get a hit on the quarterback, and really affect the play. A lot of times he's coming off the edge and was able to steer his man or steer the quarterback into Khalid Kareem, who ultimately was able to make a play on the outside. The Kareem playing the opposite defensive end. So I look at Okwara, he has tremendous length as well. I think that's one of the things that jumps off. Over 34-inch arms, put up 225 27 times as well. So he's got some good upper body strength to him as well as an outside rusher. When he's 6'4", 252, he's kind of that tweener. He could be a 4-3 defensive end, put his hand in the ground, can also play as a stand-up defensive end. I think he's one of those guys who will offer some versatility there for Seattle. And then Seattle at the end of round 2, 64 overall, got the pick from Kansas City. I'm looking at Neville Gallimore out of Oklahoma, 6'2", 304, and this is a guy who's known for his quick first step. I think that's one of the things that you see with him firing off the ball, quick swim move off the ball to beat the center off the ball. And with Gallimore, measures in, again, 6'2", 304, ran a 4.79 40. So again, tremendous burst, a guy who can really fire off the ball in a hurry. Not overly quick when it came to the 3-cone drill and the short shuttle, but that's not going to be his game. He's going to be a guy who's going to look to shoot gaps, quick penetrator, guy that can get into the backfield and make plays early on the football. 17 tackles for loss and 8.5 sacks in his career, a guy who just progressively got better and better with his skill set trying to get after the quarterback. So I think end of round 2 will be nice value there. And a guy that, look, Jaron Reed was re-signed. He has some pass rush ability on the interior of that line. Poona Ford's more of your anchor there at nose tackle. I think Neville Gallimore would give them really good depth at the position, depth that they're obviously really sorely lacking. So you address everything up front. So then you're looking at that secondary, and I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here. In round 3, I'm looking at Kenny Robinson out of West Virginia, more notably the XFL and the St. Louis Battlehawks. Kenny Robinson is a guy, look, he's already been able to put some game film together in a professional setting, and he played well. Played well for St. Louis, was really one of the playmakers and one of the leaders there on the back end of that defense. And West Virginia, look, in 2 seasons, 123 tackles, had 7 interceptions, 2 of which he returned for touchdowns, 7 pass breakups as well. So tremendous athlete, tremendous length as well. Again, 6'2", 200 pounds. And when you look at Seattle, you're asking, well, do they need a safety? They've got Quandre Diggs at the free safety position, but I think Kenny Robinson can come in there. They've got Bradley McDougald. I just don't see him being the guy. Marquise Blair's also there. But I think, bringing in Kenny Robinson, having some of that professional experience, I think he has a leg up over some of the other guys. I feel that, he really fits that mold. He could potentially play the cornerback position as well. I think he has some of that versatility to him. I think that would actually be a good pick in round number 3. Could they go corner here? I think it's entirely possible. So this is a pick that might be a little bit out of left field, especially when you're looking at, I have to go into my 4th round. There's Darnay Holmes out of UCLA that's going to be sitting there. But not really any corners that have size that'd be of the right value in round number 3. So if you look at round 2 and their picks in round number 2, AJ Terrell, if he's on the board, and I have him actually on the board when they draft Julian Okwara at 59, AJ Terrell could potentially go to Seattle at number 59 overall. I've got him penciled in at 61 to Tennessee, but look, Seattle needs some help at the cornerback position, and I don't know that they would pass on a corner looking at my draft now. So AJ Terrell could very well end up being that guy, and if that's the case, then I think this pick could potentially be used on a pass rusher. And if that's the case, and you're looking at Jonathan Greenard out of Florida, Khalid Kareem out of Notre Dame, or two guys that would probably be there at the end of round number 3. So just coming up with some additional options as I look at my draft, as I try to finalize and fine tune my mock draft. So we'll see how all of that plays out. I think in round number 4, you have to look at getting some weapons for Russell Wilson. You do have DK Metcalf. You have Tyler Lockett. You brought in Phillip Dorsett in free agency. But I think, who's that next receiver going to be? Who's going to be another guy that can be a presence there for Russell Wilson? You have 3 great tight ends. You brought in Greg Olsen in free agency. That's going to give you some leadership there. Will Dissly really surprised everyone with his athleticism there. And then Jacob Hollister, they brought him in, and he's a guy who shows that he can catch the football as well. So they've got quite a few weapons at the tight end position, but I'm looking at KJ Hill. I think this is a guy that's going to bring something that they don't really have at that receiver position. They have a lot of guys who are dynamic and the speedsters, but KJ Hill, what I really like about him is his ability to, as a route runner, ability to get open. That's one of the things that Ohio State receivers are just known for running those crisp routes, able to get open, just average 11.6 yards per reception. So really not a guy who's going to stretch the field vertically, but a guy, like I said, very quick in and out of his breaks, had 10 touchdowns in 2019 as a target there for Justin Fields. And, I think he's a complementary piece. He's not going to be a number 1 wideout, but he's a nice complementary piece. 4'6", 40, so he's not the most explosive guy, but 6 foot, 196 pounds. I think this feels like the right range for him. Some people have him coming off the board in the 3rd round. I think 4th round makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at Seattle on the interior of that offensive line. I think, again, when you have all those hits on the quarterback, not just the sacks, but those hits end up adding up, and you want to be able to protect Russell Wilson as much as possible. And you look at the interior of that line, you've got Ethan Posick out of LSU. You've got DJ Fluker there at the right guard position. Phil Haynes, a guy that I really liked that they signed as well. Ethan Posick could potentially be playing center because you've got BJ Finney in there that you brought in from Pittsburgh. I think they could bring in another guy on the interior of that offensive line. And Solomon Kinley out of Georgia, very physical player. He and Andrew Thomas just punishing guys on the left side of that Georgia offensive line, or the Georgia offensive line. They would just punish guys. 6'3", 337 pounds, generates a ton of movement, very powerful at the point of attack. Not the most athletically gifted guy, but a guy who I think is going to generate a ton of movement, tremendously powerful. So I think, ultimately, if you could have Phil Haynes on one side and Solomon Kinley on the other, you've got a couple of guys that are just going to generate a ton of movement. And then I'm looking in round number 6, Seattle's last pick in the draft. This is where I have them taking a corner. And like I said, it might make sense for them to take a corner before this point in the draft, but I look at Seattle, and I'm looking at a guy that I'm really trying to find some length, and looking at a corner, and that's why, again, AJ Terrell makes a ton of sense. Seattle likes those long corners. Chris Williamson out of Minnesota. He's 6', 205. Seattle has a compensatory pick, number 215 overall. And I think Chris Williamson, look, this was a guy who he and Antoine Winfield Jr., those were the two guys that really set the tone for PJ Fleck's secondary there with the Gophers. I thought Williamson was one of the guys, just kind of an unsung hero of that secondary. A guy who I thought, he only had 7 pass breakups, just the one interception that he ran back 43 yards for a touchdown. But, a guy who has really good cover skills. He has really good size, and, looked pretty good in postseason workout, in the postseason, not only in the bowl game, but also at the East-West Shrine game. I believe that's where he was, off the top of my head. Can't remember. I believe it was the East-West Shrine game. But Chris Williamson, I think he's a prospect that the more you watch him play, the more you like of him. So 7th round is probably where Williamson's going to come off the board. I think he does get drafted, even though he wasn't a combine invite. But I think if I were to look at this draft now, after I look at this my mock draft, I think you still go Cleveland in the first round. Round 2, probably AJ Terrell. Then you look defensive tackle. You go Neville Gallimore at that point. I think you're fine there. And then in round number 3, or possibly Jonathan Greenard. And then in round number 3, you could go defensive tackle, not Neville Gallimore, but you could potentially, let's see. I'm sorry, in round number 3, there's Curtis Weaver, that you could potentially take there in round number 2 as well. I'm sorry, you go AJ Terrell in round number 2. Round number 3, if you trade up, you can potentially get Curtis Weaver as a pass rusher. If you stay there at the bottom of round number 3, then you're probably looking at Khalid Kareem, Jonathan Greenard possibly. And then if you end up going defensive tackle in, let's see, in the 4th round, at some point, if you go KJ Hill, then there's Rashard Lawrence that's going to be out there, potentially McTelvin Agim out of Arkansas, even Nick Coe out of Auburn, 6'5", 285 pounds, athletic guy. That could be a potential pickup there in round number 4 for Seattle. So I think there are going to be some options that are going to be out there, and it'll be interesting to see which direction Seattle decides to go, because I think they need to address, obviously, that defense. They got to address the back end of the defense. They got to put pressure on the quarterback, and they have to protect Russell Wilson. Those should be their priorities. In which order they do that, it's really going to depend on who's on the board. But I think you have to make sure that you don't leave this draft without addressing each of those areas. And then finally, we have the Los Angeles Rams. Now the Rams, they're in a situation, they don't have, they tried to win now, and they don't have the draft capital for the next couple of years. Traded away their first round pick to Jacksonville in the Jalen Ramsey trade, and had to release Clay Matthews. They had to release Todd Gurley. So a team that's really strapped for cash, don't really have a whole lot there to work with. And in round number 2, I think you have to replace Todd Gurley. Malcolm Brown, Darrell Henderson, John Kelly, none of those guys are going to move the needle with the running game. So I think you need to get a guy in there that's going to emerge and really be that guy that can be the bell cow for them. And I'm looking at Cam Akers. Cam Akers out of Florida State, 5'10", 217 pounds, ran a 4.47 40 at the combine, 35.5-inch vertical leap as well. This was a guy who burst onto the scene as a true freshman, really took over the backfield, even though Jaquez Patrick, the upperclassman, was already there at the position. Akers, over 1,000 yards on the ground for the Seminoles, 7 touchdowns as well. Had kind of a drop off there in 2018 with Willie Taggart. It seemed like, the vision wasn't really there. Rather than try to cut back, back to the inside, he kept looking to try to take the ball to the outside. Really wasn't trusting his eyes. 2019 bounce back season, over 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns. And look, this is a guy who can also catch the football out of the backfield, 69 receptions in his career. I look at Cam Akers. He's kind of that next running back up. I think after you get past the first 4 running backs, namely DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Cam Akers is right there. He and Zach Moss are the next 2 running backs. And I think getting Cam Akers, you get a starter, a guy who can be a 3-down back for you. And I think that really kind of sets things in motion there for the Rams for the rest of their draft. I think you also have to shore up that offensive line. I think the Rams struggled with protecting Goff, keeping him in the pocket, also struggled with the running game. And I look at the interior of that line. Right now they have Austin Corbett penciled in, along with Austin Blythe at the guard positions. Joseph Noteboom, really a tackle, penciled in as a potential guard as well. I think you have to get better at the guard position. And Andrew Whitworth, look, the ageless wonder, he's back for another year, but he's pushing 40. You need to address the tackle position as well. You do have Bobby Evans, you have David Edwards. They filled in well for Whitworth and Rob Havenstein down the stretch. So you may have something there with that young nucleus, but I think you have to also address the offensive tackle position, before everything's all said and done. So with their 2 third-round picks, I actually have them taking a couple of offensive linemen. You may say, well, they have to address all these holes on defense, and that's true. But I think if you're not protecting Jared Goff, and you're not really generating any movement in the running game, because they really weren't for Todd Gurley. You look at his yards per carry average, it wasn't impressive at all. Then you're really not going to go anywhere. That team, it was the offense that really stirred the drink more than anything else. Yes, you had the most dominant player up front in Aaron Donald, but if that offense isn't clicking and firing on all cylinders, we saw that in the Super Bowl. They lost 13-3. They only gave up 13 points to the Patriots, but if you can only put up 3 points, you're not going to win very many games. And so I look at what the Rams are going to do, and I look at a guy like John Simpson out of Clemson. Very physical guy, 6'4", 321 pounds, 34 reps at 225 at the combine. A guy who is just, he's big, he's physical, he'll maul you at the point of attack. I like that pick for the Rams. Get physical up front. And then at the end of round number 3, I'm looking at Sadiq Charles out of LSU. He's 6'4", 321 pounds, pretty athletic kid, ran a 5.05 540 at the combine. I need to get him to play a little bit more, or would love to see him play a little bit more upright. Does kind of bend at the waist a little bit. That more acute angle leaves him susceptible to getting off balance. But I think Andrew Whitworth could take this kid under his wing and help with some of that development, help with some of that technique. Because I think he does have that skill set. Look, down the stretch, I thought that there were times where he played pretty darn well. Some people were saying, look, against Clemson, he was abused at times. And I didn't see that. I saw a player who, yes, he took some of his lumps at times, but he did a really good job driving his man up the field and away from the pocket, and utilized his length to his advantage. And really, I thought, as the game progressed, really got comfortable and, I thought did a solid job there for LSU. 3rd round feels about right for Sadiq Charles, coming out as a junior. I think in round number 4, I think the Rams end up looking for a linebacker, and whether it's inside or outside, I think you have to go linebacker. And I'm actually looking at Troy Dye out of Oregon. Could he come off the board in round 3? It's entirely possible. 6'3", 231 pounds. Troy Dye was a guy who led Oregon in tackles. Came into his senior season leading the team in tackles in each of his first 3 seasons, and really didn't disappoint. Throughout the year. twice had over 100 tackles for the Ducks, 391 total tackles, 41 and a half tackles for loss, 13 sacks, 5 interceptions, 14 pass breakups, 4 forced fumbles. Here's the thing with Troy Dye, the knock that I have on him is, yes, he's a volume tackler, but a lot of those tackles were made down the football field. He wasn't really making a lot of them around the line of scrimmage. He's the guy who's going to be a run and chase type of a linebacker. He's got to make those plays down around the line of scrimmage. He is a tremendous athlete, a guy who shows some pretty good range in pass protection as well, struggles against the run. So I think, the thing that I do like about him is he does have that athleticism and a guy who can cover. When you look at the linebackers currently on the Rams roster, I think that's an area that the Rams really struggle. You've got Micah Kaiser, who's more of a run defender. Kenny Young, sideline to sideline player. He's probably the best of their interior linebackers when it comes to the cover skills. Traven Howard came from TCU as a converted safety, was kind of that safety linebacker hybrid type. So he could cover a little bit. But I think you bring in Troy Dye, and that'll at least help solidify the position, at least being able to cover the running back, and tight end. Getting Leonard Floyd, signing him at that outside linebacker position. He's going to team with Samson Ebukam. I think you have the two of them coming off the edge, Justin Lawler as well, that kind of tempers that pass rush need just a little bit. Michael Brockers ultimately coming back to the Rams, couldn't sign that deal with the Ravens. I think that's huge for the Rams. And then you get a nose tackle in Ashawn Robinson. So there are a few acquisitions there that I think they really hit a home run with, given their limited cap space. I thought the Rams did some nice work there. Their biggest loss actually might be at the kicking position. You lose Todd Gurley, you lose Clay Matthews, but Greg the Leg Zuerlein was almost automatic there in special teams. You got to bring in a guy who is you can rely on in the kicking game. And I'm looking at Rodrigo Blankenship out of Georgia in the 6th round. I think that's going to be a nice fit there. Rodrigo, known for those glasses, the famed glasses there. Really haven't seen a pair of glasses like that really since Brandon Burlsworth. But I look at him, and he's the best kicker in college football there for Georgia, and made some big kicks and pressure situations there in the SEC. I think he ultimately goes to the Rams there in round number 6. And then in round 7, I think the Rams have to go, get another corner. You have Troy Hill and you have Jalen Ramsey, but there really isn't a whole lot behind them. Could you go safety here? It's entirely possible. You have Taylor Rapp and John Johnson. Could use some depth behind the two of them, but I really think you need to get another corner. That's really the biggest thing. And I think a kid from Oklahoma, Parnell Motley, a guy who I thought struggled early on in his career mightily, but came in as a senior and had 13 pass breakups, a guy who showed some pretty good ball skills, 33 pass breakups in his career, 6 interceptions as well. And I think, he also had 5 forced fumbles this past season, a guy who really knows how to get after the football. The ball skills were evident. Only, I believe it was a 29-inch vertical leap. So the athleticism is a bit of a concern, but I think he has some decent cover skills and a guy who could be that third corner, potentially. He'll battle David Long for that third cornerback spot. I think Parnell Motley, getting him late, in round number 7, a kid who does have some pretty good ball skills. I think that could be an option there for the Rams. So that is our tour of the NFC West. We only have the AFC West left. And in our next podcast, which should be in the next day or so, we're going to be taking a look at, the Chargers. What do they do with the quarterback position? You're moving on from Phillip Rivers. I think that first pick has to be a quarterback, whether it's Justin Herbert or Jordan Love. We'll have to find that out. Possibly even Tua Tagovailoa. There are some rumors that Justin Herbert might be in favor, in the Dolphins' favor over Tua because of the issues with the hip. Could that be a smokescreen? Who knows? So there's definitely going to be a quarterback going to the Chargers there. And then you have to replace Melvin Gordon. Yes, you signed Austin Eckler, but you need a running back. Round 2, Jonathan Taylor, possibility. You get another Wisconsin running back. I think it could happen. You look at the Raiders. They're going to be drafting relatively early, number 12 overall. I already spoke to the fact that they need a wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb. They also have a number 2 or a second first round pick. And I think they're probably going to look at the secondary, potentially a safety. And you'll have to tune into the next podcast. I'm kind of throwing a little bit of a curveball here, who I think is the best safety in this draft. We'll talk about that. Number 15 overall, Denver. I honestly believe a lot of people are saying they may go defense. I think they need to get a vertical threat for Drew Lock. I thought he really needed that. And that's one of the things that's lacking in Denver right now. That's really what he had in Missouri. And that's really when he excelled, was when he had that vertical threat. Henry Ruggs III could be off the board before 15, but I think that would be a perfect pick there for Drew Lock. And we'll talk more about why that is. And then Kansas City, I think they have to find a pass rusher. I think they absolutely have to find a pass rusher opposite Frank Clark. Yetur Gross-Matos could potentially be off the board to Seattle before that, as we talked about. But if he's sitting there at 32 overall, Chiefs would be crazy not to go ahead and jump on, the big pass rusher there out of Penn State. So those, just an early look at the first round picks there for the AFC West. Hope you guys have enjoyed the content so far. Hope you join me again for episode 32 when we do look at the AFC West. But until then, take care, everyone. Make sure you're washing your hands. Be safe out there. Bye the social distancing, sheltering in place, and we'll do this again, here in the next couple of days. So for readyforthedraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 31 of the 2020 podcast series, getting you ready for the NFL draft. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze, and take care, everyone. I am out of here.